Boa noite. Para que serve a filosofia? Ele diz que serve para prevenir catástrofes e para fazer ver as coisas de outra maneira. E é de uma maneira diferente que ele se destaca no debate da cultura contemporânea e na análise crítica dos desafios políticos do mundo. Diz que o capitalismo é indestrutível e provoca, com essa esquerda que está aí, quem precisa de direita. O Roda Viva entrevista hoje o filósofo e psicanalista Slavoj Zizek, professor da Universidade de Ljubljana, da Eslovênia, e diretor internacional do Instituto de Humanidades da Universidade de Londres. O filósofo Slavoj Zizek tem uma maneira singular de fazer ligações entre história da filosofia, crítica cultural e política. Especialista em Jacques Lacan, o principal seguidor de Freud, Slavoj Zizek também se tornou conhecido entre os cinéfilos. Ele é um especialista em Hitchcock. Como filósofo e crítico da cultura, ele escreve para várias publicações de prestígio no mundo, inclusive no Brasil, onde retornou recentemente para lançar o seu último livro, A Visão em Paralaxe.
A Visão em Paralaxe. Na orelha do livro, a explicação de paralaxe. Medida da mudança de posição aparente de um objeto em relação a um segundo plano mais distante, quando esse objeto é visto a partir de ângulos diferentes. Um fenômeno óptico, onde os objetos parecem sair do lugar quando mudamos a posição de observação. Zizek aborda a atualidade a partir de uma paralaxe, de uma divisão dos pontos de vista como o fato necessário para a defesa de uma posição, de uma ideia. Navega pelos mais variados cenários intelectuais, da teoria social para a crítica da cultura, da teoria do cinema para o marxismo, a psicanálise e a política. Slavoj Zizek nasceu na cidade de Ljubljana, na Eslovênia, em 1949. É filósofo, psicanalista e um dos principais teóricos contemporâneos. Viveu na juventude e na vida universitária o ambiente político criado pela formação da República Socialista Federal Iugoslava. A Eslovênia, vizinha da Áustria, era uma das 6 repúblicas da antiga Iugoslávia. Se tornou independente em 1991, quando Zizek, aos 42 anos de idade, já ganhava evidência no cenário intelectual da União Europeia. Nome presente no debate sobre a desintegração dos Estados socialistas, ele também levou suas teses e críticas ao universo do cinema, do feminismo, da religião e da política. Ligado a um movimento de minorias organizadas em Ljubljana, uma das mais bonitas capitais europeias e de vida cultural intensa, Zizek chegou a ser candidato à presidência da República pelo Partido Liberal Democrático Esloveno. Perdeu a eleição e se dedicou integralmente à carreira acadêmica, se tornando também um especialista em Jacques Lacan, o principal seguidor de Freud. Slavoj Zizek dá aulas na Universidade de Ljubljana. Também é professor visitante em várias universidades norte-americanas, Columbia, Michigan, Princeton, e tem vários livros publicados. Em Bem-vindo ao Deserto do Real, pergunta: com essa esquerda, quem precisa de direita? Uma crítica ao pensamento de esquerda criado a partir dos ataques de 11 de setembro de 2001 nos Estados Unidos. Às portas da Revolução é uma reunião de textos de Lenin, uma nova leitura da Revolução Bolchevique e de seu líder teórico. O livro mais recente, A Visão em Paralaxe, é uma combinação de alta cultura com drama cotidiano. Um conjunto de análises e críticas, muitas vezes apresentadas com humor e ironia. É considerado o mais importante trabalho teórico de Slavoj Zizek.
Para entrevistar o filósofo Slavoj Zizek, convidamos Emir Sader, sociólogo, Maria Rita Kell, psicanalista e escritora, Laura Greenhalgh, editora executiva do jornal Estado de São Paulo e coordenadora dos cadernos Aliás e Cultura do jornal, Vladimir Safatli, professor do Departamento de Filosofia da Universidade de São Paulo, e Luísa Moraes, repórter da TV Cultura, que fará as perguntas enviadas antecipadamente por telespectadores. No site www.tvcultura.com.br/Roda Viva, você pode se informar sobre os próximos programas e enviar por e-mail perguntas, críticas e sugestões. E está aqui também com a gente, como sempre, o cartunista Paulo Caruso, para registrar os momentos, os flagrantes desse programa. Boa noite. Tudo bem?
Good evening to you.
Zizek, nós convencionamos aqui que, apesar de todos os seus títulos, vamos tratá-lo por você. Pode ser? A primeira pergunta que eu queria trazer é sobre a situação mundial. Você tem escrito a respeito do capitalismo, sobre a capacidade do capitalismo de atravessar as crises. E hoje vivemos uma enorme crise do capitalismo. Como é que você vê esse momento?
First, I'm very grateful that you allowed me to be here, and I like to be called you, because I feel very proletarian. If somebody calls me the majestic, the plural, you, I always look back like who is the other one. Yes, you went directly to the crucial topic. Where do we stand today? I claim that we are at the end of a utopia. Usually people say the end of the utopia was the 1990, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of communist utopia, welfare state utopia. But I think the true utopia were the 1990s, the happy Clinton years, the years of the, let's call it, Fukuyama utopia. We thought we found a formula, liberal democratic capitalism. I mean, everybody makes fun of Fukuyama, like that idiot who thought history is over. But isn't it that even today, almost all of us are, how should I make an adverb, Fukuyamaists. Even the left today, they don't really think about, is there capitalism to stay? Do we have a better system than parliamentary democracy? Silently, we all accept it. We only want to make the system more just, more efficient, like maybe those of you here who are old enough remember how in our youth we were dreaming about socialism with a human face. Sorry. I think that the majority of the left today dreams about global capitalism with a human face, and for me, this is ultimately the only true question. Can we still think about a radical global alternative, or should we accept that capitalism and liberal democracy are, if not the best, the least worst, the least bad of what there is, so that we should remain within them and just play the game? In this sense, in this precise sense, I remain somehow a Marxist. I think that today we are slowly able to identify a whole series of, to use this old term, antagonisms, ecology, the rise of those who live in favelas, apartheid, problems of intellectual property, problems of biogenetics, and so on, where I think the liberal, democratic, and at the same time market-oriented capitalist logic is not enough to confront these problems. I am well aware that the era of state socialism is over. It's not that we will have to return to some state communism or whatever, new Leninist party controlling everything, but literally we will have to invent new forms of collective action. If not, I'm afraid we are approaching a very sad world, where nature will be ruined, where we will have new gated communities, apartheid, humanity will be more and more divided into those who are in and those who are out. Did you notice this paradox, how we say 1919, the world is united, Berlin Wall fell down. Now, new walls are being constructed all around. West Bank and Israel, United States and Mexico, the wall symbolic, now even real around Western Europe, and so on and so on. So I think that while, of course, we should not just sit and wait, we should be engaged in struggles and so on, but we should nonetheless be aware that we are confronting, in many dimensions, some big critical situation. And we have, from ecological standpoint, from social tensions and so on. And my Marxism means that we should keep this in mind all the time. We do not have the answer yet.
Ok.
Boa noite. No Visão em Paralaxe, você se refere a um sujeito pós-traumático. Sei que você é psicanalista, profundo conhecedor de Lacan e Freud, Eu lhe pergunto se esse sujeito pós-traumático seria um sujeito pós-neurótico. Não é exatamente o que a gente vê na clínica, em psicanálise, mas talvez em termos de uma nova subjetividade emergente, se esse sujeito das identidades fluidas, se ele já não seria mais o neurótico freudiano, se há um sujeito, uma nova clínica surgindo aí.
First, let me make one thing clear. I am psychoanalyst, but only in a theoretical sense. I don't have the patience, the ability, and so on to treat real people. I mean, just look at me. I'm nervous and so on, and look deep into your heart and ask yourself a simple question. If you were to have serious psychic troubles, can you even imagine coming to me as the analyst? No, probably not. No, okay. So let's make this clear. I speak as a theoretician. But you touched here a crucial point. I definitely think that already in the 20th century, a new form of subjectivity emerged, for which I don't like this name, post-traumatic, but it points in the right direction. The first figure would have been the so-called Musulmanen, Muslims in concentration camps. We can call them in vampire terminology the living dead. Those who were so psychically destroyed that they were literally deprived of the, how should you call it, libidinal substance of their being. These are people who no longer have the ability of empathy, they are no longer engaged with the world, they are in a way just vegetating. To use a non-precise poetic term, you know, when you look into their eyes, you don't see that spark of life, of the will to live. And I think that this category is crucial. It is becoming a kind of a symbol or exemplary case of, I'm even tempted to say, making a quick connection between psychoanalysis and social theory, the new figure of the proletarian. Because let's not forget that for Marx, proletarian is not simply the worker who is exploited. Proletarian means for Marx, in very precise philosophical Hegelian sense, a subject, a pure form of subject deprived of all substantial content. You are just a pure form, all content is taken away from you. And isn't that this post-traumatic form of subjectivity, a living dead, to put it in vampire terms, the one who is in a way still alive as a subject? You function, you talk, but it is as if you are pure death drive without libido, without all engagement and so on. And again, we have different forms of this, from victims of natural disasters, victims of war, torture, even victims of purely biological processes like Alzheimer, brain degeneration, and so on. I think that there is also a political dimension to it. Although I often disagree with Tony Negri and Michael Hart, I agree with them when they claim that what is going on today is something they call, using the old term from early modernity, the enclosure of the commons, the privatization of commons, not in the sense of state property, but in the sense of the substance of our being, what belongs to all of us as collective heritage. And the processes we are witnessing today are, I think, new forms of the enclosure of commons. Ecology means even the natural base of our being is ruined, taken away from us. Intellectual property, our symbolic inheritance is taken away, and so on and so on. So I think that this, let's call it empty subject, the living dead, which is for me, but that's more a philosophical topic, the form of Cartesian subjectivity, Descartes' cogito. So in this sense, not to get lost into too much talking, in this sense, I think that today we should redefine the proletarian position. Not only also, of course, but not only exploited workers, but all other forms of proletarization. For example, an intellectual worker who programs computers, but all that he does, he is deprived of it. He does it for Microsoft, for whatever. All the result of his work is privatized or belongs to the other. Or people who live in ruined environment, in ecological catastrophe or whatever. Aren't these, in a way, new figures of proletarians? So I think we should stick to the word proletarian and also, now comes the tough part, to what is its opposite in Marxism. Communism. Communism, I claim, will have to be reinvented. Of course, it's not the old state communism. We just need to nationalize all industry. The problem is how to reappropriate these commons, which are taken away from us. The collective, not even property, the collective substance of our lives. So here you can see how, to conclude, how I think that it's crucial for today's thought, not to think in different separated domains, to see how apparently a purely philosophical category like cogito, Descartes, the pure subject, has a very precise psychoanalytic content. I claim that so-called post-traumatic subject is Descartes' cogito that we encounter in reality, but also a very precise political content. And just to add another note, why don't I like the term post-traumatic subject? Because I hope you will agree with me, I think that it's too much a term which fits developed Western societies. There, when we have a trauma, it's usually something that happens quickly, and then you are in a post-traumatic situation, how to deal with it. You are raped, there is a terrorist attack, there is an earthquake, you survive it, and then how to deal with it. But isn't it that in less developed third world countries, there is no post-traumatic situation, the trauma simply goes on. In the West, you are raped, then if you survive, you are traumatized, how to do it with it. In third world countries, you are raped, and then you are raped again, and then you know that you will be raped again. You know, it's a much more desperate situation. Like, it's irony to speak for an ordinary woman in Congo. For example, Republic of Congo may be the site of the greatest catastrophe, humanitarian, that she lives in a post-traumatic. No, she lives in a permanent trauma. So there is a lot of things to do here, and I think, again, we need more than ever not only social analysis, but social analysis linked with psychoanalysis, and against the background of this, to think about philosophy. If I may just add another thing, then I will stop. Why philosophy? You are the bad guy. Okay, I got it. My super ego. No, okay. I know what would have happened. If you were to have a button there, you would press it now to stop me. No, I just wanted to say that things are changing so fast today that we have to think philosophically even. What does it mean to be a human being today? We don't even really know.
Tem uma questão.
Was this an applause or finally you are over? But okay.
Foi um aplauso.
Okay.
Sapato.
Tem uma questão. Eu queria, se você pudesse desenvolver um pouco mais essa sua ideia da necessidade de recuperação do comunismo como categoria política, porque na sua primeira resposta você havia dito da necessidade de novas formas de ação coletiva enquanto uma tarefa política fundamental para hoje em dia. Você acredita que essas novas formas de ação política elas podem ser desenvolvidas no interior das estruturas institucionais da democracia liberal e parlamentar?
I would put it in this way: yes and no. I'm well aware of the danger of putting too much trust into this, what usually we cover with the term Porto Alegre, no? All this idea of self-organized local communities and so on and so on. There is a limit to that. We should never forget, as all radical leftists are well aware, that in order for all these local community movements to function, you usually need a state mechanism to guarantee the conditions and so on and so on. For me, the crucial, of course, we should not just sit down and say these local movements are irrelevant, because some leftist pessimists claim that all these local movements, they just, by treating some of the worst symptoms of capitalism, they ultimately just help the system to survive longer. So the idea is, let's sit back and wait for the big crisis. No, I don't agree with that. It's a catastrophe. If you wait for the big crisis, you basically get caught in this obsessional economy. You know, I know, because I'm one. You know how obsessional neurotics function. They wait all the time for some big event, but their whole enjoyment is in the fact that this big event is always postponed, no? I mean, many radical leftists today in the Western academia, they wait for the revolution, and in the meantime, they quite enjoy their comfortable lives and so on. But nonetheless, we should also not be bad utopians in the sense of, oh, in local communities here, Zapatistas there, we already have it. The problem is more complex, and this is why, although I'm often critical of them, but political phenomena like Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, even much more interesting for me, Morales in Bolivia, and my true hero, maybe, the one who was brutally deposed, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, Lavalas, the flood movement in Haiti, in a situation which may appear hopeless, total hegemony of capitalism and so on. What they did is not only rely on these local self-organized communities, but they tried to, with all the improvisation, to reinvent, to find, with all the experiments, of course we have failures, a new form of state which would somehow not only rely on standard political representation, but would be in a direct dialogue with these new movements. I think what we can do is this, but above all, my message would have been trust theory think. That is to say, I don't think we really even know where we are. We have many descriptions. First, we have the old Marxists or liberals who claim, oh, it's just a new stage of capitalism or imperialism. Obviously not. Something new is emerging, but what? We have all these post-theories. We live in a post-industrial society, information society. I think these are still, how should I call them, journalistic phrases. We don't yet have what Frederick Jameson calls cognitive...
Professor.
Yes, okay, I will stop immediately.
Okay.
Cognitive mapping. So, to conclude, you will like this. Okay, now I ignore you, I turn to the boss directly. You know, old Marxists like this 11th thesis on Feuerbach. Philosophers have only interpreted the world, we have to also to change the world. What if today the first thing to do for a true leftist is the exact opposite, to say maybe in the 20th century we tried to change the world too much. The task today is to step back and interpret it a little bit more.
Ok. Eu tentei interrompê-lo porque a Luísa me fez um sinal de que teria uma pergunta ligada ao assunto que você estava tratando.
Na verdade, uma pergunta do Natanael Araújo da Silva, de Cachoeira do Itapemirim, do Espírito Santo, que ele pergunta justamente, a gente está falando agora, citando essa questão da crise.
Name of a city.
Yes.
It's not the Espírito Santo, it's the name of the city. Okay, sorry, I know, sorry.
Another state. Como a filosofia pode ajudar a entender os períodos de crise, como da crise financeira pela qual o mundo passa? Ela pode ser útil?
And that's a nice, brutal question, and I like this nice, like they say, like John McCain, whom I don't like, likes to say, no bullshit, no, they directly ask the question, no? It's a good question because first I must say, philosophy for me has clear limits. It's interesting how even people who criticize us somehow expect us, maybe you, Vladimir, who are also a philosopher, noticed it, they expect us nonetheless to have an answer to everything. There was Iraq war. What do you think about it as a philosopher? There was tsunami in Indonesia. What do you think? Well, I don't know. But I can do something, which I think is also very important today. I cannot, as a philosopher, provide answers to questions. What I can do is to correct the question itself. The true problem today is not only that we don't have answers, is that often the way we perceive a problem, the way we formulate the problem, the way we formulate a question is already part of the problem. It's a mystification. For example, the example that I used yesterday at my talk and all the time, tolerance. Everybody is, of course, for tolerance. I am not, because I claim that today tolerance is a mystifying category. Why? for example, did you notice how today when people fight racism, they automatically translate racism into a problem of tolerance? But for me, racism is not a problem of tolerance. Look at Martin Luther King. He never mentioned tolerance. For him, racism against the blacks was a problem of economic exploitation, racist laws, and so on. Today, people always, as if the problem is, you are, I don't know, I am black, you are white, how will we tolerate each other, and so on. This is ridiculous. Like, even more in feminism. It would be humiliating for a woman feminist to say, I want to be more tolerated by men. It's ridiculous. So why? The question, what I can do as a philosopher is to say, but why do we today automatically perceive racism as a problem of tolerance? Here comes the analysis. Because in our so-called, it's a wrong term, post-ideological, post-political society, economy is more and more, and politics a matter of administration, rational negotiation. So all the remaining conflicts are translated into problems of cultural conflict, cultural wars. So we culturalize problems. Like, for example, when I listen to, in the United States, to American leftist radical analysts, if you listen to them, it is as if the racism against Mexicans in the United States is a matter of cultural intolerance. They don't like to talk about economic exploitation. They talk about cultural intolerance. They are different. And they do all this pseudo-psychoanalytic stuff. We cannot tolerate them because we project into them our own otherness. So then, at the end, in a vulgar Freudian way, the way to find tolerance is all of us to do collective psychoanalysis and so on. And I can go on, but I will stop. You are my superego here. Indefinitely, you see, this is what we can do as philosophers. Fighting intolerance, fighting sexism and so on is a problem. But let's at least formulate the problem in a proper way. And here would be my answer. I don't have time, of course, to go into it. With regard to this economic fiasco, so-called meltdown. Of course, I don't know what to do. But I, as a philosopher, can note some things. I think we, the left, can learn at least two things from it. First, the extent to which capital as, let's be frank, the absolute of our lives. Everything turns around capital is, to refer to the title of my book on Christianity, it's a very fragile absolute. The extent to which capital as something people think very brutal, like, you know, no bullshit, no dreams, capital money, how it relies not only on belief, but on belief into belief into belief. What's the problem today when they say we have to re-establish trust, belief? It's not simply that I should believe that the system works. I should believe that the majority of people will believe and so on. So that's one lesson. To what extent today's world system is nonetheless theological. Marx was already aware of this strange theological dimension inscribed into the very core of capitalism. And Walter Benjamin knew this when he said capitalism is a religion of its own. The second thing, just very quickly, that I learned is that for me the big lesson of this crisis is political economy. Market definitely, if you are not a total idiot, you should get the lesson of this crisis, which is there is no market which is not already sustained by state political decisions and so on and so on. We have to become aware that every economy is political economy. So it's not true what John McCain said. Now it's the moment of patriotic unity, we should step back. No, this is not the time for uniting our forces. This is the time for politics. Economy today needs to be politicized. That would be it doesn't solve the system, but at least I hope it changes the perspective a little bit.
Jack, eu vou fazer duas perguntas para você que estão relacionadas com as suas respostas no primeiro bloco do programa. Eu tenho pensado muito nos últimos dias na história enquanto espetáculo, porque a gente tem ouvido e acompanha as críticas e as defesas do modelo da ordem econômica global, Então, isso está se passando nos últimos anos, com apoiadores e detratores, enfim, com um debate em torno disso. Mas o que se viu nos últimos dias foi um processo muito rápido, começando por Wall Street, depois se espalhando por outros lugares do mundo, em que símbolos de solidez, né, supostamente de solidez, e o caso mais emblemático é o Lehman Brothers, da noite para o dia viram símbolos de vulnerabilidade. Então, me parece que isso é muito impactante. Há um sistema financeiro em xeque que pode desordenar o sistema econômico, mas, evidentemente, eles estão procurando os próprios antídotos no meio dessa confusão toda. Então, a primeira pergunta é, diante deste espetáculo que a história está nos proporcionando, você acha que é um momento de reavaliação da lógica capitalista ou isso vai ser um episódio efêmero e o capitalismo vai continuar o seu curso? Segunda questão. Eu acho muito interessante quando você traz a discussão sobre tolerância, ou seja, o conceito de tolerância embutindo uma mistificação. E aí eu pergunto para você o seguinte... Isso tem a ver com a falha das políticas ecumênicas no campo religioso? Ou seja, também o ecumenismo, o discurso do ecumenismo também é mistificador? São as duas perguntas.
Very nice questions. The first one, of course, I think we should use this crisis as something that will enable us to question the fundamentals of capitalism. And I think ultimately the game cannot go on indefinitely. Here again, I remain a Marxist. I think we will have to find a way not simply to abolish capitalism, but nonetheless to somehow get over it, not to treat it as the ultimate horizon of our social existence. But nonetheless, you know, what always fascinated me is this incredible, how should I call it, plasticity of capitalism. The problem with capitalism is that it's in a crisis from its very beginning. If you look even before the French Revolution, there were crises, there were prophets of doom claiming, oh, this is the end. From somewhere, I would say, late 18th century, there are prophets who claim capitalism is nearing its end. Then Marx thought maybe French Commune is the end. Lenin thought it's the end. Mao thought it's the end. But the problem is, the more capitalism is disintegrating, rotting, and so on, it's like that stupid bird, phoenix. The more it returns. Again, my point is not it's indestructible, we are doomed to it, and so on. But we just should really be aware of this infinite plasticity. Like some leftists put their hope very masochistically into a big ecological catastrophe. Like if something really horrible happens, like, I don't know, global warming, big earthquake, whatever, we will have to impose some collective, more collective logic. I claim not necessarily. I can well imagine with global warming, capitalism quickly reinventing itself, and it's already happening. I was told that now with this prospect of the ice on the Arctic melting down in 1 or 2 years, so that it will be possible to have direct North Passage, boats going directly from China through the North Pole to United States. You know that they are already buying real estate on Arctic, up there on Greenland and so on. So let's not trust this, it will not be that simply because of some external crisis, it will collapse. I still remain here a Marxist. I claim that what is much more destructive in the sense of threatening to capitalism is the fact, which was already foretold by Marx, that the core of, let's call it productivity, inventiveness, is moving to what we refer to as intellectual property. And I think here capitalism is encountering its limit. It's getting more and more difficult to force, to trap intellectual productivity, computer programs, whatever, all this immaterial production into the form of private property. Let's not forget that the recent crisis that we have now is originally the crisis of intellectual property. You know what happened in 2001 or 2? There was first this so-called digital meltdown, the crisis of all this digital intellectual, and in order to prevent global economic crisis, American government tried artificially to redirect investment from that into real estate, housing, and then it failed here. So intellectual property, which is totally an inherent problem, not an external threat to capitalism, is, I think, a much more threatening phenomenon. Let's take a person like Bill Gates. The very fact that a person who was 30 years ago nobody, okay, doing some playing in his garage, and then in 20, 30 years you become the most rich man in the world. Isn't this a proof that you cannot even pretend that market value in any way reflects some real productivity, real achievement? Market works totally pathologically here. Even a conservative American economist with whom I was in debate used a wonderful metaphor. He told me that if the standard market movement with its ups and downs is like, you know, when you go to a doctor to check your heart, EKG, EKG, that market with intellectual property, it's like a heavy heart attack, as they put, you know, up, down, all this points towards a very deep crisis. So it's clear more and more with all this that it's not simply market and state regulation. And then all these liberal pseudo-debates, to what extent should the state intervene into market? Market cannot survive without state intervention. The paradox is that, for example, you remember that a couple of years ago, United States prosecuted Microsoft against monopoly and so on. This is for me a wonderful paradox. It means that the state has to intervene so that market survives. Market spontaneously would long ago have abolished itself. Here I see immanent threats to capitalism. So yes, definitely we should bear in mind this logic, how to put it, the end of capitalism, but not in this naive way of this will be the final crisis or whatever. But Professor, we should... Second question, yes, which was tolerance and...
Ecumenismo.
Ecumenismo. I totally agree with you here. I would go even a step further. Today's predominant spirituality, this is why I like to defend in my work Christian legacy, to avoid any misunderstanding. I'm 1000% atheist. No, I'm not playing any return of God, post-secular thought. What interests me in Christianity is the social form of organization that it implies. Christianity is for me the first fully atheist religion. The message is God is dead, everything depends on us. Us is Holy Spirit, which means ultimately the Communist Party, if you want, collectivity, without any guarantee in God. For me, the message of Christ's death is not I will save you, is, as many intelligent theologists said, the message of Christianity is not God will save us, it's not we can trust God, but God is impotent without us. That is to say, it's all on us. It's this logic of active, collective action. Collective activity. Against this, here I come to your point. I think that, to put it in abstract terms, this spirituality, which fits perfectly today's global capitalism, is something like some vague pseudo-Dalai Lama Orientalist spirituality. Now I will even establish the link between your first and second question. Do you know that some kind of vague Buddhism is extremely popular, I read, among those speculative capitalists? Because for them, it covers precisely the phenomenon you mentioned in your first question, this utter fragility, like today up, then everything can collapse and so on. And you know, there is a whole school of Zen capitalists, they call themselves, which claim, you see, capitalism is the ultimate proof that our description of reality, as you know, the curtain of Maya, all reality is fragile, pseudo-reality, things do not really exist, they are just phenomena. This perfectly covers this, as it were, ontological experience of late capitalism, where you have bubble, it explodes, there is no substantial reality, and so on and so on. So for me, to put it in brutal terms, in religious terms, the struggle would be between materialist Christians and New Age spiritualists. New Age spiritualism, even if it's covered as green, tolerant, ecumenic, that's the enemy today. That's the voice of wisdom, depoliticization, the voice of... Why? The voice of what? What's the message of this spontaneous Western... You know, people once spoke about Western Marxism. I like to speak about Western Buddhism as this spontaneous Orientalism. It's life, economy is just a game. Don't take it seriously. Withdraw, observe the world as a game. But that's the only way to survive. Capitalism is so dynamic that you need this cynical or ironic, whichever way you put it, distance to survive. Which is why, did you notice another thing? Even those new materialists, and this is an interesting phenomenon today, for the first time that I remember in United States, brutal materialism, like Richard Dawkins, Dennett, and so on, became acceptable as the mainstream. But if you look closely at their work, they always make an exception. They say, but Buddhist meditation is different. This is just a spirituality which doesn't involve any wrong epistemological statements. It's a pure self-experience, and so on and so on. Again, this is for me the enemy today. Which is why, again, I think that we should save not Christianity as a religion, but, how should I put it, the forum of social engagement, which was the first time formulated with Paul in this logic of the community of believers, this, how should I put it, fighting collective based on fight, a struggling collective. There is something unique which is worth saving in Christian legacy, against, as you said, this poor ecumenism.
Professor.
Yeah.
Okay. Emir.
Who was the professor, me or he?
Você tem uma obra muito diversa, com abordagens, com disciplinas que você
This is a
integra.
nice way to say I write too much. I accept. Yeah, okay.
Este livro, que sai agora no Brasil, aparece como um livro finalmente conceitual, metodológico. Parece que você vai revelar finalmente a tua metodologia, qual a tua novidade radical do teu método, que para nós marxistas é sempre um tema privilegiado. Eu queria que você resumisse, se conseguir, para os espectadores, o que é paralaxe. Por que introduzir um novo conceito? Você até chega a especificar no final do livro que ele vale até para a economia política. A principal paralaxe da economia política, a lacuna entre a realidade da vida social material cotidiana e o real da dança especulativa do capital. Quer dizer, não só um conceito abstrato, serviria até para dar conta de fenômenos como esse. Segundo, estou de acordo com todas as suas análises a respeito da obra do Negri, Michael Hart, Holloway. Se você fosse ao próximo... Não. Se você fosse ao próximo Fórum Social Mundial, vai se dar em Belém, no fim de janeiro, qual a principal mensagem de proposta que você levaria a partir dessas posições e do mundo atual? Duas questões.
First, I like very much this question. The only problem, as we both know, is to answer it properly. It would have been like 2-3 hours between, I would say, no? But it is an answer to a very precise question. How to revive, how to bring it up to date, what once we called materialist dialectics. I claim that dialectics should be freed from all this evolutionism, naive progressism, and so on. And that's why I privileged the term parallax. We know what parallax means, this apparent change in the object, which reflects just the change of your position. But my point would have been that, nonetheless, the two are mediated, that there is a parallax. By parallax, I mean a radical gap, in the sense of a split of perspective where there is no higher unity to bring together the two, inscribed into reality itself. There is a gap, an inconsistency in reality itself. This is what for me is, for example, class struggle in society and so on. Class struggle is not just an antagonism within society. It is something that splits society from within. What do I mean by this? To put it in very simple terms, a simple example. Left and right, if they still exist politically. You cannot have an objective view on society and say, this is left, politically, this is right. as Jacques Lacan would have put it, there is no meta-language. Every definition of left or right is already either from the leftist or from the rightist position. So there is no global unity within which then there are opposites. There is no way to escape the radical split. But my big philosophical problem, again, is Hegel's dialectics. So if you ask me this, how should I call it naively, question at a gunpoint, like you point a gun at me, one sentence or I shoot, where do you stand? I'm a Hegelian. My true absolute love is Hegel, and all other things are subordinated to Hegel. I read Marx. What interests me is how it is not possible to understand Marx without Hegel, which is why I was very glad to hear from my friends that you have here in Brazil, for decades already, one of the big school of these Hegelian Marxists who study in detail how you cannot understand Capital without references to Hegel's logic, all the stuff, and so on and so on. The project is a very radical, in a way, philosophical one. I think against all the postmodern stuff, all this plurality, multitude, whatever, that it's very crazy thought that Hegel ultimately is still the unsurpassable horizon of our thinking. We still did not have come truly to terms with what Hegel had to say. And I go to the end in the part of the book, maybe this will be attractive to some readers, that I like most. It's the part that nobody reads of this book. The second part on cognitivism. I try to confront psychoanalysis with cognitivism or brain sciences. And I try to show how even there, in some way, the most intelligent cognitivists rediscover the Hegelian logic of positing the presuppositions of this dialectical loop, retroactive circle, and so on. Now, to the last point that you make about what would my message have been? My message would have been a kind of a cautious, catastrophic optimism. That is to say, to be aware that's so important that when there is a crisis, like this financial crisis now, if we don't know, if it will be deepened and so on, it is a chance for the left. But it's also a chance for the right. It's always a dangerous moment. Crisis is an opened moment. Crisis is a moment when the crisis is always also a crisis of discourse. It's a struggle for hegemony. The clearest example here is Germany in the 20s, Hitler. How did Hitler win? Not simply by winning politically. He first won the struggle, the ideological struggle. People experienced the situation in Germany as critical. Hitler offered one explanation. It's really the result of German humiliation, Jewish plot, and so on and so on. The danger today is who will win the fight for what does this crisis mean. I can well imagine some kind of right-wing authoritarianism winning, claiming in a slight anti-Semitic, false anti-capitalist way, this is the result of Jewish Wall Street speculations, we need a more organized capitalism. Maybe they will revive even some kind of militarism with John McCain, claiming that, I don't know, this is always the standard imperialist solution, to evoke war, emergency state, to get out of. So what I'm saying is that crisis is a dangerous moment. It gives you a chance, but you can also lose much more radically. So my message would have been, again, as a philosopher, you never get from me a concrete answer, but don't lose patience. Arthur Rimbaud, the great poet, used this wonderful phrase, science avec patience, science with patience. This is what we need today. I disagree, very briefly, I disagree radically, unfortunately, although otherwise I agree with him, with Noam Chomsky, who recently told a friend of mine told me, today things are clear, we don't need theory, we just have to describe to the people what is going on. No, more than ever, today we need theory.
Maria Rita.
Sim, acho que vai ser
we are
breve.
back to you,
Sim.
the circle.
Acho que será breve. Você se refere várias vezes em sua obra, em suas conferências, sobre a moral do gozo, que na contemporaneidade talvez seja a forma mais eficiente de agenciamento, de poder, etc. Mas você também diz que ela é tirânica e que ela produz uma espécie de culpa generalizada por não se conseguir gozar o suficiente em relação ao que é ofertado. E eu lhe perguntaria se você vê, então, alguma relação de determinação entre essa moral do gozo e o crescimento quase epidêmico das depressões no século XXI.
That's a very nice question. I agree with you clinically also, as much as I know about clinics. No, that is to say, yes, to put it very simply, and I improvised about this in my talk also, how does ideology function today? I don't think the predominant form of ideology today is directly addressing you with some great ideological cause. Sacrifice yourself for your country, for freedom. It's kind of a vague spiritualized hedonism. You are expected today to be truly yourself, to enjoy a pleasurable life. And the paradox is effectively that pleasure itself turned in a way into a duty. Now, I don't know what is your experience here, but many of my psychoanalytic friends are telling me that today a typical patient feels guilt, anxiety, not because he had prohibited illicit pleasures or desires which violate social prohibitions. And then you go to the analyst allows you to get rid of the oppressive prohibitions and you can enjoy it. It's on the contrary, they feel guilty for not being able to enjoy. And they look at a psychoanalyst as somebody who will finally enable you to enjoy. I think here we can experience how Jacques Lacan was right when he said that the ultimate meaning of superego is enjoy. The ultimate superego order, injunction is enjoy. Enjoyment as duty. Which is why I think that the task of psychoanalysts today is not to teach you how to enjoy, but something very precise, to enable you to get rid of the superego order to enjoy. The message should be a very precise one. Not you should not enjoy, but you are allowed not to enjoy. Enjoyment is not an obligation. Because today, apparently, all the prohibitions are over. To give you an amusing example from Freud, the model that Freud uses, the example for Verneinung, the negation. A patient tells him in a dream, when Freud asks him about a woman in his dream, the patient says, I don't know who this woman is in my dream, but I'm sure it's not my mother. Of course, for Freud, this is proof, this is the mother. But many friends told me that today's patient would tell you, rather, I don't know who this woman is, but I'm sure it must have something to do with my mother and so on. I mean, they accept it. Prohibition is not here, but obviously something is wrong because in this space without prohibitions, the result is not we can finally freely enjoy, but that, as you pointed out, not only guilt, but melancholy, depression are stronger than ever. Mm-hmm. So I think that the superego paradox is fundamental today. And again, it has something to do with functioning of today's capitalism, where the superego injunction is absolutely crucial, which is why, as I developed in one of my earlier books, for me, Coca-Cola is the ultimate object of desire. Why? Because it's a strange drink which basically it doesn't satisfy your thirst. It makes you even more thirsty. The more you drink, the more you have to drink and so on. It's a nice reproduction of the fundamental paradox of superego. Freud already knew it that the more you try to obey the superego command, the more you feel guilty. No? Mm-hmm. So you see, and this example is also a wonderful example of how those who claim, psychoanalysis is over, we live in permissive society, we no longer need it, they are wrong. I think only today we are experiencing the central paradox which was bothering Freud. Freud's paradox is not I'm impotent because of paternal prohibition. No, Freud's paradox is when you have a father who prohibits you sex, this is nothing bad. You rebel against the father, you do it even better. The problem is when you have a father who tells you what man you are, did you already seduce some girls? This is the safest way to make you impotent, no, and so on, no? So more than ever we need psychoanalysis today. Surprise, I stopped.
Ok, thank you. Sapato.
Ok, Zizek, na verdade eu gostaria de fazer uma pergunta mais vinculada à sua concepção de ação política, porque você é um dos poucos teóricos da esquerda atual que admitem a relação entre violência e política. Mesmo que, no seu caso, não se trate necessariamente de uma apologia da violência física ou alguma coisa dessa natureza, mas o caráter necessariamente violento de toda ação política. Tanto é assim que você escreveu uma grande introdução a coletâneas de textos, por exemplo, do Robespierre, né? Que inclusive saiu aqui no Brasil. Eu tenho, na verdade, duas perguntas, porque lendo os seus textos sobre isso, eu tive um pouco a impressão de que há uma certa sobreposição entre a violência estatal, mesmo que seja de um Estado revolucionário, e a violência revolucionária. Quer dizer, minha primeira pergunta é, você vê esses dois tipos de violência como a mesma? Quer dizer, a violência do povo contra o Estado e do Estado mesmo revolucionário contra o povo? E eu coloco essa pergunta porque aí eu gostaria de fazer uma segunda, que diz respeito, por exemplo, a algumas coisas que você desenvolveu no seu livro sobre Lenin, né? Num determinado momento, você afirma que, bem, não se trata de ser stalinista, mas o momento Stalin foi um momento que tem uma certa necessidade, né? E a minha impressão é um pouco que você utiliza um esquema hegeliano que consiste em dizer, bem, é necessário um poder que quebre o interesse particular dos indivíduos, e esse poder que quebra esses interesses particulares impõe, então, uma possibilidade de uma espécie de universal. Quer dizer, essa violência ela foi necessária, não é mais necessária. Mas você chega mesmo a falar, por exemplo, desse momento onde o Brecht faz um poema dizendo que ele se sentiu realmente comunista no momento em que ele viu os tanques entrando em Berlim Oriental, porque era a ideia, em última instância, de quebrar os interesses individuais dos particulares. Mas, para que esse esquema funcione, é necessário que esse poder ele tenha um interesse universal muito claro. Você ainda vê isso, por exemplo, nesses exemplos que você levantou, no caso do Stalin e companhia?
Oh, this is, again, a very complex topic. First, yes, in a way, I think one should, how should I put it, de-fetishize violence. I think that this total horror at violence today, it's part of this liberal tolerance ideology, and, you start criticizing violence, you start criticizing violence, at the end you advocate torture. I think that Guantanamo and all that, it's a necessary consequence of this apparent anti-violent liberalism, whatever. No, my basic view on violence, as I repeat it all the time, is that usually we locate violence as something which, how do we measure violence? Violence is something which disturbs the way things are usually going. Something interrupts the usual run of things, oh my God, it's violence. But I think that we should, again, another example of parallax, we should change the perspective and see the invisible violence which has to be here all the time so that things go on as normal. This violence interests me. It can be objective economic violence, it can be police violence, whatever. So the aspect of political violence that interests me, it's not so much physical violence, killing people, whatever. It's always, if you really want to change the basic functioning of the existing order, it is by definition perceived as violence. And here I try to rehabilitate, but of course in a totally non-theological way, what Walter Benjamin called divine violence. It's not Al-Qaeda. It's not violence as an instrument of God. It's something totally different. I see it as what? Walter Benjamin and many others drew attention to a, how should I put it, necessary excess of state violence, in the sense that even in the most democratic society, where power is totally legitimized democratically, in order for state power to function, there has to be some kind of super-ego threat, in the sense that, we live in a democracy, but ultimately we can do whatever we want. No power exists without this excess. And for me, what Benjamin calls divine violence is a kind of a counter-violence to this excess. And in this sense, let me be very clear. I am for violence, but I think Gandhi was more violent than Hitler. Wasn't it that Hitler's violence in killing millions was basically, to use the terms of Nietzsche, reactive violence? He was afraid that something will really change. As we all know, fascism was a desperate attempt to save capitalism. But what Gandhi did, although he was against violence, the way he started to, through boycott, through strike, to stop the entire functioning of the colonial economy and state apparatus in India, that's the violence I am for. I also think there is another aspect of violence, which is why I like a film which many of my liberal friends are horrified at, with Brad Pitt and Ed Norton, David Fincher's, I hope you saw it, Fight Club. If you are not sure if a friend of yours is a liberal or a true leftist, show him that film and ask him. If he will say, no, it's a proto-fascist film, he is a liberal, dismiss him. Why? The lesson is very, you know that wonderful scene in the film where the guy, through his fist, starts to beat himself. This is needed. Liberation hurts. Liberation costs. So this is my first point. No, I have no sympathy for Stalinism. The difficulty for me in thinking Stalinism is how to avoid both traps. One is the Trotskyist trap, which basically, to simplify it, claims if only Lenin were to survive a little bit longer, made pact with Trotsky, everything would have been okay. It treats Stalinism as a simple contingent aberration. Then there are the right-wingers or liberals who claim, oh, everything was already in Marx, in Robespierre, in Plato, it was necessary. I think the difficult thing is to read the tragedy of the October Revolution. I still insist it started with an gigantic emancipatory potential. How could it be that that ended in the Stalinist catastrophe? The second thing that I like to emphasize is how Stalinist order is totally different from fascism. I resist terribly putting it together into some kind of the same category of totalitarianism. Just one anecdote, maybe you will like it, and then I will stop. Do you know that even in the worst Gulag, every year on Stalin's birthday, they collected all prisoners who had to sign a telegram to Stalin, wishing him all the best for his birthday, and so on. You cannot even imagine the same in Nazi Germany. What should they? Collect all the Jews in Auschwitz and sign a telegram to Hitler or what? This means that the whole logic was, or another example, the show monster trials. You have the accused who admit in this. There was never a trial against the Jews in Germany. You know, the whole logic is radically different. We are not yet able to think the difference. We are not even yet able to see what was the true horror, the true tragedy of Stalinism. I think it's still even the great Marxists like Frankfurt School, did you notice how they were obsessed with fascism? But they practically totally ignored Stalinism. You have one short book by Marcuse, which is not really a theory, doesn't work, and so on. I think the right-wingers will not be able to do it. It's our task of the left to think Stalinism. We can do it. We are the only ones who can do it. You see, I was relatively
Zizek,
short.
Você fala sobre questões que são de nosso interesse, mas muitas delas são distantes do Brasil. E eu sei que você já esteve outras vezes no Brasil. Eu queria que você falasse um pouco do que representa para você esse país.
Oh, now I will give you a very strange answer. If it's not the first association that you would expect from me, like I will say now something horrible, maybe when I will exit this building, people will beat me. I hate carnival. I'm a Stalinist. I hate the idea of carnival. People freely dancing there and so on. No, there should be order, discipline. People should march in order. My idea would be of an organized carnival where you give directions, move like this, move. But the best association I have with Brazil is Canudos. You remember that crazy community. What I like so much is that usually this kind of utopian communities, they self-destroy themselves. But as far as I know from history, it didn't. The state has to intervene 3 times in a very brutal way, killing them all. This is a beautiful example. Canudos is my ideal of this. The second thing I like here is that although you have favelas, what I like, although, okay, it's not a big thing, is that at least they are not hidden. I don't know how it is here, but when I was in Salvador, in Rio, you are on a street which is upper middle class, 2 blocks away, it's already favela, then at least you don't hide them. If you go to other big cities, like already Buenos Aires down, the whole center is etheric, clean, and they say, no poor people, they are out, no? So at least it's mixed. I mean, I know this can also be used for ideology, like then you can claim, you see, we are all together, rich and poor, big carnival, we are one big, I'm well aware of racism here, de facto racism. I mean, all liberals here like blacks, no? They claim blacks bring vitality, dance, poetry, but I think you don't have very many blacks in the top executive and so on. No, like you have 50% of black. So this is one element. That the other element that I like, and I think it's not simply commercial culture. It can, I'm not saying it is, used progressively. It has a potential. You will laugh. Your telenovelas. You know that when I was young in my country, they were extremely popular. Don't you have a series called The Slave Girl Saura? Yes. You know that this was more popular than all North American series in my country. When the actress visited Ljubljana, they thought there would be 50 people for autogram. 30,000 people came. The whole center of the city was blocked. And I think it's not only ideology. It can also be used. Somebody told me that, where was it, Colombia or Venezuela? It was used to do political comment and so on. It's a global phenomenon. It's a living proof that Hollywood or American imaginary does not dominate us totally. This is the good side of globalization, that also other cultures are given a chance to appear globally. Latino American telenovelas are a global phenomenon, or why not? I like them, I watch them often with my son. You know these Chinese big heroic spectacle films like The Hero, House of the Flying Daggers. They're doing better spectacles than Americans themselves. I made a joke with my friends recently in Denver, Colorado. I told them, the way things looks now, China is making better big commercial films than United States. Maybe 20 years from now, we intellectuals will write a petition to local city, enough of Chinese commercial films, organize an art theater for good American art films or what. So this is the good side of globalization, and this is what I see without idealizing Brazil. I think that you don't just complain in this vulgar anti-American way, oh, globalization, American. Globalization is a game where we can learn the game and beat the opponent in it. Globalization is also a chance for others to change United States into a great nation, but one among them. And here you are on a good way. You are giving us hope that we will move fast enough to a more multi-centric community, multi-centric world, which will have, I know, its own problems, but it's important to do it, to say it in a very non-hypocritical way. It will be even very good for the Americans. What Bush tried to do in the last 8 years, promoting America as the universal policeman, I mean, if you are a cynical, sadist leftist, anti-American, you should have a permanent orgasm, to give you a little bit of sexuality, a permanent orgasm looking Bush. He was even in the long-term interest of American capital and ruling class, Bush was a catastrophe. So everybody would be better if there would have been more countries like, again, I don't idealize you. As I already told you, I don't buy this stuff, happy carnival and so on and so on. No, I even dislike the word carnival. For me, like Holocaust or Gulag were also one big carnival, you know. This was carnival. Stalinist purges were carnival. Carnival means what? The order turns around, today you are king, tomorrow you are a beggar. That was the Stalinist purge. Today you are a central committee, tomorrow you are English spy, shot. No, I don't like carnivals, I like order.
Ok. O Roda Viva está chegando ao seu fim e nós queremos agradecer muito a presença do filósofo Slavoj Zizek e da bancada de entrevistadores. Agradecemos também a sua atenção e a colaboração, lembrando que as perguntas de telespectadores que não foram apresentadas durante o programa serão encaminhadas ao nosso convidado. O Roda Viva volta na próxima segunda-feira, às 10h10 da noite. Uma ótima semana a todos. Boa noite.